The fine arrived before the rule it was meant to enforce could reach them. Across the semiconductor supply chain, companies are paying penalties for conduct that a specific regulatory requirement, the one written to define exactly that obligation in explicit terms, has been administratively suspended. The Bureau of Industry and Security paused enforcement of the affiliates rule through late 2026. The enforcement actions kept coming anyway. One administrative document, read twice, explains why those two facts are not contradictory. First, for what it suspends, then for what it does not. The silence between those two columns is where the compliance industry now lives. The deferral is not an obscure instrument. It is a document with a precise scope, and that precision is its most consequential feature. What it establishes plainly is this: enforcement of the affiliates rule is suspended. That rule would have required American parent companies to extend their export control compliance programs to cover their Chinese incorporated affiliates, closing what the rulemaking commentary described as a subsidiary transfer loophole. Controlled technology that could not move from an American company to a Chinese buyer through an arm's-length transaction could, under the gap the rule was designed to close, move laterally from the American company to its own Chinese affiliate without triggering the same licensing review. The deferral suspends the enforcement of the requirement that would have addressed that gap explicitly. It names a date through which enforcement is deferred. It names the rule to which that deferral applies. And it implicitly establishes, by saying nothing further, that the Export Administration regulations in their entirety remain in force. Three elements are present in the record: the date, the category, the boundary of what is not suspended. The document does not repeal the rule. It does not issue a safe harbor. It does not suspend the Bureau of Industry and Security's authority to pursue enforcement actions under what the regulations describe as the knowledge standard, which is a different instrument entirely, sitting in a different section of the regulatory architecture, predating the affiliates rule by years. The knowledge standard imposes an affirmative obligation on exporters and their affiliates to identify red flags suggesting diversion to restricted end users or restricted destinations, and to act on them. That obligation did not come into existence with the affiliates rule. The deferral of the affiliates rule did not touch it. These are three separate facts, each present in the record, and the deferral itself makes them visible by the precision with which it limits its own scope. Reading the document again, what it does not say becomes the operative text. The deferral says nothing about the knowledge standard. That silence is not incidental. The knowledge standard was never within the deferral's reach, because it predates the rule and operates independently of whether the rule is enforced. But the practical consequence of that silence is the entire compliance problem in compressed form. Companies with Chinese affiliates remain obligated, under a standard that has not been paused, to screen for precisely the diversion risks the affiliates rule was written to address in explicit regulatory language. The rule is suspended. The obligation to identify and act on the risks the rule was designed to codify is not suspended. Those two things can coexist because they were never the same instrument. The deferral also says nothing about ongoing enforcement actions. The Bureau of Industry and Security has continued to issue penalty orders during the deferral window. The document does not stay those proceedings. It does not create a period of regulatory forbearance during which a company building compliance infrastructure can set that work aside. A company reading the deferral as permission to delay would be reading only the document in front of it. The enforcement record running concurrently with the deferral is what the document does not mention, and that record is the operative one for liability purposes. The penalty orders issued during the pause do not cite the affiliates rule as their basis. They cite the knowledge standard. The record does not establish that the Bureau of Industry and Security is prosecuting affiliates rule violations specifically. It establishes that the Bureau is prosecuting knowledge standard violations that overlap with the exact conduct the affiliates rule was written to address. That distinction is in the record, and it is a meaningful one. The most conspicuous gap in the document is this: it does not define what compliance during the pause period looks like. A suspension of enforcement without guidance on what constitutes adequate interim conduct leaves companies in undefined territory. The knowledge standard fills that gap by default, because it has never been suspended. Consider a building code amendment that has been deferred. The specific new ventilation requirement is not yet enforced, but the general duty of care requiring builders to identify and mitigate foreseeable hazards was never amended. The amendment's deferral does not suspend the duty. It only delays the moment when the specific measurement becomes the legal standard. Any builder who reads the deferral as covering both is reading the amendment and ignoring the underlying statute. Companies are therefore building compliance infrastructure for a rule that is not yet enforced, because the alternative, having no infrastructure, exposes them to liability under the standard that is enforced. Their own compliance filings are the record of that judgment. The record does not say why enforcement was paused. Whether industry pushback, administrative capacity constraints, interagency disagreement, or anticipated revision drove the decision is not in the text. The deferral does not settle whether the Bureau of Industry and Security intends to enforce the affiliate's rule in its current form, modify it before the deferral expires, or allow it to lapse. The compliance infrastructure companies are building may therefore be designed for a rule that arrives in a different form than the one currently deferred, and the record does not resolve that. What the document declines to say about its own origins is as complete a silence as what it declines to say about the knowledge standard. The deferral, the enforcement actions, and the knowledge standard guidance together establish something narrower than the policy debate suggests. The gap between explicit obligation and implicit standard is real, documented, and currently unresolved by any text in the record. Read together, the deferral, the enforcement actions, and the compliance guidance establish something the deferral alone does not. The Bureau of Industry and Security has structured the regulatory environment so that the pause of a specific rule cannot be read as a pause of the underlying obligation. The deferral establishes what it suspends with precision. It does not say, anywhere in its operative text, that the obligations the affiliate's rule was designed to codify have been suspended. The rule is paused. The obligation is not. The compliance industry's response to that structure, building programs for a rule that is not yet enforced, is itself a document. Companies are writing, in their own compliance filings, that they understand the knowledge standard to be operative now. That is the closest thing to an industry-wide acknowledgement in the record that the deferral is not the safe harbor its surface reading might suggest. The pause is in the text. The obligation is in everything the text declined to pause. The deferral expires late 2026, which means there is another document coming, either an enforcement notice, a revised rule, or a second deferral. The question the record leaves open is which of those three the next text will be, and what its silences will establish about the ones that came before it. If you want to read that document alongside us when it arrives, subscribe and turn on notifications. We will be in the margins.